I'm very excited to be joined today by Mike Westhoff. Mike is an incredible coach. He's revolutionized pro football special teams, and I think there's a lot, when we look at it today and step back and hear some of these stories, I think a lot of what we do in special teams today certainly has some of its foundation in things that Mike did. And Coach wrote a book called Figure It Out, My 32-Year Journey While Revolutionizing Pro Football's Special Teams. It's an incredible book. You have to pick it up for sure. It's one you won't be able to put down, and it's not just for the special teams coach. I think this is just good coaching in general. So, Coach, welcome to the podcast, and thank you for taking the time.
No, I'm happy to do it. Thank you. It's a interesting idea that you have, and I'm happy to be a part of it.
The stories in this are incredible, and your influences and the people you've worked with over the years, just incredible. The names and running down the list here, and I'm sure we'll get into some of this, and this probably doesn't even cover all of them, but Don Shula, Jimmy Johnson, Lee Corso, Frank Cush, Bill Parcells, Eric Mangini, Sean Payton, John Harbaugh, Rex Ryan, Herm Edwards, Bear Bryant, Woody Hayes. An incredible list of players, too long to mention. A lot of incredible coaches you've been able to learn from and have impacted you. And I know there's a lot of stories. Again, guys, pick up the book to really dig into these. But, Coach, if you would just share really some of the guys who were most impactful in your development as a coach.
Don Shula, obvious. I mean, he's first. And you know, in the coaching business, in a lot of ways, in my opinion, you know, he was first and nobody was second. I mean, you know, he was the guy that got so many things started in so many different ways. And to have to work for him for such a long time was quite an honor. And it wasn't easy. Don was tough. And he was so knowledgeable. He could coach any position. He could walk into any meeting room and pretty much take it over. And he knew the rules. As I mentioned in the book, and I described them, he wasn't the head coach of the Miami Dolphins. He was the head coach of the National Football League. That's who he was. Everything that went on in the business, he was a part of. Business decisions, television, rule changes, you name it, Don was involved in it. That's who he was. And he did it all with such a realm of integrity, you know, always doing it the right way. You know, there was no cheating. He wasn't going to be the guy that took cheap shots. Now, he was tough, and he believed in a tough brand of football. But he was also so versatile that, you know, on one hand, you know, he could have the Larry Zonkas and Jim Kicks and Mercury Morrises and, you know, lead the league in rushing and win and go undefeated. And then all of a sudden he has Dan Marino that he can throw the ball all over the lot and do a million different things. Now, we didn't win the Super Bowl with Dan, but that was the person least responsible for that flaw was Dan Marino, believe me. But that's who he was. So that was the biggest influence in my life. Now, some of the things that people that, you know, helped me go all the way back to my childhood with my father, who was a great athlete himself. And, you know, actually Dan Marino broke my father's City of Pittsburgh high school records. It was Dan that broke them. So, you know, it's a pretty good guy that maybe could beat you. But my high school coach, you know, we were undefeated in Western Pennsylvania. We were arguably the number one team in the state. So, you know, you get started there. And then as you work your way through things, so many other people. Frank Cush gave me a great opportunity to get in the NFL. Now, I came in such a precarious role, you know, and you have to read the book to find out exactly how Frank did this. And it in itself is a unique story that very few people have. And, you know, with a happenstance meeting with Frank at a convention, and all of a sudden 6 years later, it turns into a job in the National Football League, a job that I was, you know, to say I was prepared for, I was not. I was a strength coach. I coached the tight ends. I was assistant offensive line coach. I was Frank's assistant. And then all of a sudden I became a special teams coach, of which I knew nothing about, zero. So, you know, so there's a whole role. And then some roles at just in a much smaller area would be my meetings with Woody Hayes, Bear Bryant, Bob Knight, Bill Walsh, Mike Ditka, Al Davis. Al offered me several jobs. Those are pretty interesting. And then, of course, the guys that I worked with Rex and, you know, Mangini, worked with Eric for a few years. And, of course, Sean Payton, who I described as quite possibly being the best on-the-field teacher as a coach that I saw in my 32-year career. Sean Payton is really good. So, and then the players that I dealt with, I was at a Miami Dolphin practice a week ago, and I was watching. I really don't know anybody. I was with Dan. I know Dan, of course. I don't know that. I know some of the coaches because Madison and Surtain basically play for me, so they're on their staff on defense. And Wes Welker's a good friend of mine. He coaches their receivers, but I don't know any of the players really. I was just a fan watching. But the offensive practice wasn't poor by any means. That wouldn't be right to say, but it wasn't quite to what I was used to seeing. And when I was interviewed, I talked about that, and I don't believe that I was critical. But as a coach, we see things through a certain set of glasses that we always have on. And if you don't have them on, then maybe you're not as good a coach as you think you are, because that's what we should be doing. It's who we are. We can't help ourselves. And so, when I was interviewed, I was talking a little bit about it. And it's not that I was disappointed. It's just not quite, it just wasn't as sharp as I was hoping to see, to tell you the truth. All right. So I got, I was basted a little bit for that, which I don't care. I could care less. But anyway, I let them know. I said, it's not like I haven't been on the field for some pretty good offensive practices. I mean, most of my career is with Dan Marino and Don Shula. Okay. Well, then when I went up to the Jets, you had Vinny Testaverde, who could still throw it all over the lot, and Chad Pennington, who came to life and became, the great quarterback up there. Oh, and then, by the way, we also had a guy up there named Brett Favre, and he's a pretty good football player. And then I finished my career with Sean Payton and Drew Brees. So I know what an offensive practice is supposed to look like, and I was part of it coaching for years. I sat in the meetings with Don Shula and Dan Marino. I did all that. So for me to look at things a certain way, I think if I were a coach and I heard Mike Westhoff talk a little bit, and maybe there's something that he just wasn't sure of, I would like to talk to him and listen to why, rather than maybe to say that I was a little too harsh. That's just me. But I guess I have a feel for what it's supposed to look like. And there's a bar that you have raised. And I learned to get that bar very, very high. And I got that from Don Shula. And I carried that my entire career with everything I did. You may not be the most popular guy all the time, but at the end, they're going to really appreciate what you've done, and you're going to be really good. And so that's a little bit how I was influenced and how I see things as a coach generally. Now there's a million specifics, but that's a little bit of a start.
In speaking of your start, and you mentioned it a little here, right? You are put into some roles that there's not necessarily a textbook for. Not that there is in football for anything. Certainly we've seen the amount of resources that can aid us in our journey and help us develop as coaches. There's more and more of that. The pandemic brought a lot of that about. You mentioned, your book came out of the pandemic, but thinking back to my early days of coaching in the early 90s, I mean, you had some VHS tapes, maybe some DVDs you could pick up. You'd travel around going to some coaching clinics and get it, 45 minutes at a time, no real deep dives. And to really understand things, you'd have to build some relationships and be able to go and talk to guys. And, overwhelmingly, though, the title of your book was How You Got Things Done. You had to figure it out. And I think that's still true today, because now there's so much information. Sometimes it's a little bit of overload. So I think the best coaches today do have that ability to look at something, see how it's going to apply to their own situation, and as the title of the book is, figure it out, right? That what's great about our game and doing over 1,500 of these interviews, not a single one feels alike. And I feel like coaches are like a fingerprint or a snowflake. Everything is a little bit unique. They might look the same in some ways, but it's unique, and you're able to put your own spin on it. And the best coaches, that's what I think they do. They figure it out and they evolve it to fit the exact situation that they're in. And you certainly have created, I think, in this book, that theme that, if you're going to be a great coach someday or now, that's going to be something you have to do. You have to figure it out for your own situation.
Well, that's exactly the case. Yeah, you just have to do that. One thing that you have to keep in mind with football And I think anyone that doesn't quite understand this or believe this really doesn't know American football. And I don't, obviously soccer you referred to as football over much of the world, but this is a totally different game. Football, our game, is the most cerebral game that there is. I don't care what anyone tells you. We're the most academic game. And we have so many variables and so many moving parts. You know, people have compared it to chess, where chess, say, compared to checkers, and chess has all the different moves. But each chess piece has a specific number of moves it can make, some 1 to 2, whatever they are. Every one of our pieces has infinite number of moves. It's so much different. You know, and I'm a big baseball fan. I love baseball. You know, and I played it when I was a kid, and we were all pretty good, my whole family. And so you get traded from the Pittsburgh Pirates to the Philadelphia Phillies, and you're a third baseman. And you're going to bat fifth in the lineup. It's about your spot. You're a 300 hitter maybe, if you're lucky. And you go and you're going to play third base. And you've done that your whole life. So you go in, you meet with them, and the manager talks to you, and he says, "Oh, here's a signal. I touch my hat, steal second base." Okay, now you're ready. You can play. When you come to our game, you get traded from the Steelers to the Eagles, you're going to get a notebook that's 8 inches thick. It's a different game. It's different. And the thing with football, and that's why I've talked to Little League coaches, sometimes it can be a little hard. I said, you guys, all you have to do is inadvertently criticize some young man, and you can just ruin things. I said, because in our game, everybody's got a chance. You can be the little skinny little kid. You can find a place to play football. You can be a heavy young man. You can be chubby. You know, some people might want to be rude enough to say fat. I don't like that word. Go ahead, make fun of him, and he won't play. But you can find a place, and everybody can do it. And all you have to do is just be a little bit courageous, work hard, and understand it. And the next thing you know, your parents will be sitting in the stands, and you'll be having the time of your life. But we as coaches have to understand that. And now, the higher you go in that coaching tree, you know, the more specific it gets. That's what football is about. We are that great sport. And to me, you know, I love it. I think it's the greatest ever. It did so much for me. It got me a scholarship. It's how I went to college. You know, you read about it where I grew up. I grew up in a row house. All we did was fight when I was a little kid. And I didn't know any different. We didn't have much money. You know, when I went to school, I got put on a bus. 36 hours later, I arrived at the University of Wyoming. My bags were still sitting on the sidewalk, and I practiced. And that's what I know. And so, but yet it gave me a chance. It gave me a chance for a life. And I don't think there's another sport that even can come close. I was watching the Eppies last night. There was a young woman that became pretty famous. I think she's a little famous sometimes for sometimes for what she says, maybe even more so than what she does. I don't know enough of that. But she got the play of the year. And it was a penalty kick. I can remember it. And I read a description about a penalty kick. It's good. You kick the ball through a double-wide garage. That's about what it is. And the percentage at that level is about 80-some or almost 90% where people make it. That, to me, is not the play of the year. I'm sorry. That's how I feel. No disrespect, because that person's a great athlete and very, very good. But it's a different game than the game we play. The game we play, you got to make that throw and somebody smacking you in the face. It's just different. We play ours is the best game there's ever been. And I don't care. I don't care what anyone tells you. That's just the way it is. Now, you know, it's our role to not be stupid and to make it safe. Some of what I've done has been dramatically reduced because of safety regulations. I'll give you a number. I'll give you a good number. Okay, my first 30 years in the National Football League, my first 30 years, not counting PATs or field goals, whether you kick them or defend them, not counting those plays, I averaged 22 plays a game. Punts, punt return, kickoff. Okay, I averaged 22. My last 2 years in 17 and 18, when I went to the New Orleans Saints, 7. I went from 22 to 7. Now, I'm not counting the kickoff for a touchback. I mean, I'm 74. I can run down. Please. It's a non-play. So the point is, you know, the special teams role, has been dramatically altered. It's almost disappeared in college football. It's almost gone. One of the things I do a lot of, in college, it starts usually around December and it goes up till February or so with the NFL, with helping guys get jobs. I've made 1 million phone calls for people, and I'm pretty good at it. I can get them hired. A lot of colleges aren't having a coordinator now. They're breaking it up among the staff. They're finding a way to get an extra coach because this guy doesn't have as many plays as you have. I mean, I was asked to go up to the combine this year, and I went up and talked to special teams coaches, and I let them know, I was in a meeting, they had dinner, that the seat that they were sitting in, I pretty much gave them that seat. I'm pretty cocky when it comes to things like this. Did I actually do that? No, but I sure as hell helped. But I mean, I sort of believe I did it, but that's beside the point. I let them know that if you don't get out ahead of this, there's going to come a time when that owner is going to walk in with the head coach and the general manager, and he's going to say, why am I paying this guy $1 million when he coaches 8 plays? And you guys better get an answer, because this job that reached a pinnacle has now dropped to where it's never going to get back to that. It had never been to that point. It'll never get back. But it's important what you do. You just have to find a way to keep some of these plays alive. And I wrote a whole chapter as to how they could do some of those things. But it all comes down to, we've got the greatest game. We just have to be smart enough as coaches to keep it the greatest game.
I couldn't agree with you more, Coach, and I certainly want to talk about some of those ideas in just the future of our game as we get going. But the one thing in figuring things out, like you equated it to a puzzle and used some examples of how you would do that, being given certain personnel and how you would move them around the field to, influence a certain play and use a play. But I think the other thing that really came through is for you, it starts with figuring out, here's the simple scheme that we're going to build on. Just like you do on offense and defense, it's not creating something that's hugely complex. It's starting with something simple, and in the way you do it, in the way you apply it, it actually becomes very complex for the opponent to handle. If you would just give us some examples of how you grew into doing that, and really that became a big part of what you did as a special teams coach.
Sure, I'll give you exactly. I realized very early as I got into, I'm going to coach this, and I'm taking this on. And all of a sudden I'm looking around, I'm watching film and different teams, and I'm thinking, everybody's pretty much the same. This is 1982 now. I said, this all looks the same. And I said, but there's really not a lot of creativity. And there's certainly not much innovation. But what's even more important is there's very little regulation. So, I could pretty much do whatever the heck I wanted to do. Just keep it legal, of course, and things like that. But so this is where I said, also realized in a hurry that I had a timeout pretty much before every single play. Pretty much a timeout. So what I needed to do is not stand around on the sidelines with my hands in my pockets and figure out how to coach the entire game. So I started drawing everything, and I got very good at it. And I could draw really good plays that were easy to see. I had numbers for who the guys were that we were going against, et cetera, et cetera. So the guy could go in a huddle now, instead of having 2 kickoff returns or 3 like most teams had, I could have 12, because I could hold a drawing up and say, all right, hey, Joe, take a look now. Remember, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And we did not make a mistake. Did we do everything perfect? No, of course not. No. But we didn't make mistakes. We were really good at it. And so then what I came up with a philosophies. I said, all right, I'm gonna kick off coverage. I said, well, I'm playing defense now. Let's coach defense. I said, what kind of defensive coach do I want to be? What am I? Well, I like to get after it. I'm a blitz guy. I want to blitz. So what did I do? I walked into Bud Carson's office. Now, Bud Carson was one of the most brilliant defensive minds in the history of NFL football. He's the guy with the steel curtain defense with Joe Green and all those guys. So I sat with Bud and I said, Bud, do me a favor. Take me through the perimeters of your blitzing. He said, okay. So he got up on the board. And he said, the first thing you have to understand about blitzing that most people don't know is you have to establish an edge. Blitzes come, you have to get an edge. One side, one place somewhere where they can't escape, and then funnel everything. So I decided, well, okay, I'll kick to the corner. I'll use the sideline as my 12th man. Then I learned how to take two people and run them behind each other, but to show one thing but actually be doing something else, how to disguise, how to bring people in motion, how to take an assignment, give it to a person with the same assignment, but yet move them from all different spots. And if a number, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, when you're in my scheme, you're a 1, you're a safety. But my safeties came from anywhere. All right, you're a 2, you're an edge player. We had a strong side edge and a backside edge we referred to as a skim. His role was to set an edge from the edge of the front to the edge of the back, deep as the ball. He was a skimmer. All right, then we had threes. Our threes, I called them ball guys. They could come from anywhere. They had no lane, no contain, no responsibility for field position. They could come anywhere. All right, then the twos, the fours, they were like a linebacker type guy. That's who they usually were. They would come down, slide in behind, slide, make the play. Fives were bigger, stronger guys. We'd put them in different places. Sometimes if they weren't a great player, I'd put them where a team was going to double team. This guy, he can't make the tackle anyway. Let him double team him. This guy will tackle him on the 15-yard line. So I tease Joe Rose a lot. He does radio stuff in Miami, and he played for Coach Shula a long time. He was a kind of a tight end, wide receiver, hybrid guy from University of California. And I told Joe, I said, you're the reason I became a good coach. Because Coach Shula would say to me, Mike, you got to use Joe Rose on the kickoff team. I said, he was terrible. I said, if you want to get a first down, throw the ball to Joe. Throw it to Joe. He'll catch everything. You want to cover a kickoff? I don't know about Joe. What am I going to do with him? So I used to move them all over the place wherever I thought they had their best blocker or they were going to double team. I was not going to make the tackle anyway. So you create roles. All right, well, now I'm on offense. Okay, because now I'm going to run a kickoff return. Well, I'm an offensive line coach. So I said, I'm going to create a power off tackle play. And I'm going to be able to double team consistently 5 different guys, 3 strong side, 2 weak side, and run a counter off of each one of those. And I learned how to double team, who to double team with, how to change it, how to trap, who to trap with, how to cut the backside off, just like you cut the backside off and you create a wall on a running play. How to kick out block. Back then it was a wedge. We used to use 2 and 1, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you move it around and you draw it up and you know the exact distance between the lead blocker and the ball carrier. An example, when I had Justin Miller, who led the league, by the way, he was a defensive back from Clemson. Justin loved to be about 12 yards when he got the ball behind the wedge guys because he was so fast and he wanted to run and catch the wedge and then explode. Leon Washington, who also led the league, by the way, he would be 5 yards because he wanted to hide behind it and then break out. So the key thing is know how to do these things. Get a philosophy and figure it out. I did that for everything. How to do it with punt returns, how to do it with your punt team, all those kinds of things. Next thing you know, you've got a unit that can perform pretty well. And then you've got to get guys that fit it. You don't always have an all-star team. There were times, probably the best group that I was able to assemble came when I was with Jimmy Johnson. Jimmy did it at Dallas. Jimmy kind of started it. He was one of the keys that did it. He firmly believed in 3 parts to the game. He firmly believed it. Lots of people talk about it, but they don't really give it credence. Jimmy didn't care much about kickers. It's almost like he didn't want them on the team. I'm teasing, but he's not terribly far off. But everybody else, oh my goodness gracious. Because what he would think, and he did it at Dallas, you got to win 2 out of the 3 parts of the game. And he was never going to lose one of them. And that was the kicking. He was never going to lose it. Because he had an all-star team. So he came to Miami, and next thing you know, I had an all-star team. All these little peanuts. Larry Izzo, O.J. Brigance, Bernie Parmalee, Trent Gamble. And these guys were good. I mean, they were really good. Our year in 2000, I think, could be argued as the best special teams year in NFL history. Right there. Now, we didn't have the great return guy. We were good. but we didn't have the great one. But we were really good. Everything else, oh my goodness gracious, we killed everybody. But again, sometimes you don't have that. Okay, well, what do you have? Well, figure it out. Figure out what you have. I got a call this year, back in this January, I guess, from Dennis Allen, the new head coach of the Saints. Dennis was not the head coach yet. He was interviewing. And he asked me, he said, Mike, if you were coaching today, how would you configure your roster? It wasn't a good question. It was a brilliant question, because he knows that you don't have the number of plays. How do you do it? If you have to, you can't run around with a team of peanuts like I used to have back in the mid-'90s. And I had a whole group of those guys. You can't do that any longer. The game doesn't allow that. So, okay, what do you do? Where do you get the extra guy? And then how do you use them? It's not perfect. And I went through the whole thing about how to do it, what to do. And that's where you are today with football. But it's always been that. Figure out what you have, what you can do. Get a philosophy, blend it together, and make sure they know it. Make sure they know it. I got actually in an argument one time, a debate with Marty Schottenheimer. God rest him. He was a heck of a coach. But when I was with the Jets, he was finished coaching, and Brian was our coordinator, his son. And we were talking one time, and he said to me, you guys, you were good. We were really good. He said, you don't make many mistakes, many penalties. And, how do you do it? What do you do? And I said, Marty, we didn't have a mental error the whole year. He did not believe me. He didn't want to hear it. There's no way, he was arguing. I said, we didn't have a mental. We had some mistakes. We had penalties, but we did not have a mental error. Not one. Here's why. And I could show him. Here's what we did. It's all drawn up. You're looking at it. You're not going to mess it up. So, again, figure it out. Figure it out.
Well, the other theme that really came through with your guys, I said you had this scheme. You talked about how you could adjust it around. Your guys would come from all different places. But I think the overriding philosophy for you was built around the word aggressive, that you guys had, in particular, you had an aggressive approach to how you were going to use your special teams. And you see all kinds of different approaches, and I would imagine it probably varies on how much you really do value and put the detail into it. But if you do, I think you can take that approach where you're aggressive. I think you might see it out of other teams where they're very conservative, that truthfully maybe they don't value it as much. But for you, it was finding ways to really attack the other team and be aggressive.
And we wanted to be the most physical team that they played. I used to let them know that when they leave, or they're coming into our game and they're watching film of other teams, they're watching us play other teams. But they're not saying it, but they're sitting in that meeting and they're thinking, oh, Lord, I don't want to play these guys. Look, these guys, you don't know where they're coming from. You're going to get trapped. You're going to have a headache for a month. That was our goal. We were really tough, and they loved it. It just, to me, and you had to do it cleanly. I was reading a thing in the media about a guy that had been accused, had done some bounty and that kind of stuff. And that's ridiculous. We never had any of that. But I believe that the years that I was there, that we had the most physical special teams unit in NFL history. I'll argue that with anybody. We changed, several of the rules were changed because of us, the way we played things. We were just really good. We were just really tough. And I would sit in those meetings, and when I could show that really good clean, and I mean clean now, I never taught above the shoulders or below the knees. We were going to hit you clean. We were not going to hide. We were going to play face up. And I could show that great play to the meeting. Nothing carried the realm of response that did. That was the one that they'd jump out of their seats. They'd jump out of their seats. They loved it. And they'd come around and they just felt like we were tough. And I like that. It's me. I'm a little bit cocky with that. My thing was, after the game, I could be the best friend. Nobody likes me. I'm sorry. That's who I am. And it became pretty evident that that's what we did, and the reputation that we carried, and it was fun. It was fun to be a part of, and I'm extremely proud of it.
Looking at the practice side of things, you called it in your book the fastest 12 minutes of football. So those special teams period, what you're doing out on the field, really well orchestrated, takes a lot of time to plan Well, certainly more than 12 minutes to plan, but explain to us everything that you put into that period so that it could be the fastest 12-minute period in football.
Sean Payton talked to me about the way we did things, and he said in some ways it helped their whole team change a little bit as to how they practiced. And then they practiced hard. Sean's a great coach, but this tempo nobody was really used to. One of the players told me one time that before I got there, he said, "Your walkthroughs are harder than our practice was." He said, and I made the scout team and the scout team coaches. I mean, they really had to go to work. Everything had to be perfect. If I waited for 1 second for a scout team guy to line up, somebody was really going to get hell. They didn't want to be around. And I was really tough on anybody. And in the film session, you only want to be in the meeting if that was happening. So we were pretty tough with all that. And it was just something that you have to do. But you have to make an exactness. I wanted an exactness as to how we did everything. If we're running kickoff return and that double team's supposed to be on the 23-yard line with the post, then that post better be on the 23-yard line. And I would stop everything and make it do it again 1,000 miles an hour. Or I'd have, 5 guys stop, and these 5 guys, you better be going. It didn't matter. There was an exactness to everything, and everybody knew it. And then at the end, like I can remember coming in a meeting, looking at a film, and we'd be going over the practice film, and I might get to a point, say on a kickoff return, and I could get to where it was just about ready to execute, and I could freeze the film. I'd stop it. I said, take a look. And every single guy would be in the exact right position. Every guy. Now, if you weren't, and I could look over and say, my man, is there a reason why you're here and the rest of them are here? Help me if there is. Let me know when you're going to get it right. And because you want to get it right pretty soon. I was tough on them. I was just hard. I said, if you don't get it right, if I were you, I'd call home and tell mom to go get your favorite dinner because you're going to be eating a damn thing tomorrow night. I said, so it's up to you. So I was tough on them. I wasn't the easiest guy to play for. But at the end, they knew how much I cared and how much and what it was like. Because when you show it right and you do it right, then the idea is you can't get beat. They can't beat us. They can't beat us. I know it took me a little while when I went to the Saints. It took me like 2 games. Because I didn't know anybody. Sean Payton, I never met him in my life. I knew he was a good coach, but I never met him. He thought he had a really good team halfway through the year, but their special teams were just they had some failure. So he brought me in. I would not let him fire anybody. I said, if you fire somebody, I'm going to come. But I'll work with them. I'm going to run it my way. I remember standing in a meeting with the coaches, the guys that I had, after watching a practice film, and I stopped it. I said, right now, this coming week, this whole city is going to see what a real special teams unit looks like. Look out now, because we're really good. We never lost another play the rest of the year. Not even one. Now, you don't win them all, of course. No. We never lost one. That's how good we were. And we went from ranked 31st to 1st. It's all about exactness, what you develop and with the way you can do it. Yet that's just so important that you have to be able to do that. And you can't settle for anything else. Yeah, so there's an exactness. You get that down, now all of a sudden it's really fun.
That's part 1 with Coach Mike Westhoff. Tomorrow we'll be back for part 2, and we'll begin by talking about a player who he felt did an incredible job on special teams, Taysom Hill, and we'll go into other details from his book, from his career. Mike Westhoff's book is Figure It Out. I'll put a link to it in the show notes. I highly recommend it. There's a ton of takeaways from it. It's a resource you could put on your shelf and come back to again and again. And it's not just about special teams. It's about great coaching and all the things that Coach did over the course of his career. Follow me on Twitter at Coach K. Grabowski and follow all we're doing this season at coachandcoordinator.com.